But to even Aturaga can be twisted and turned by shadow. So we are already into something. Something is happening. Como los grandes podcasts, episodio 27, episode number 27, in this case, with Daniel. More than welcome here.
Thanks for having me. Very excited.
My pleasure. So Daniel, for the people that are listening now, he's a very interesting artist in more than one area of creativity, I will say. He is a writer, and he is a very nice bionicle or mecha constructor. But not only a constructor. He builds the mechas or the characters, but are characters with a lore. And I will take a guess it's because of your writer background and your passion about writing, right?
A lot of people who come just for, I think, the stories, which I find just as hilarious as the people who are there for the Legos.
Yeah, because when you get to the account, it's more than the Legos and the characters, because it's only about the username. You read the username and you already get a grasp. Okay, no, we are talking the real deal here.
I got very lucky with that handle account. I think I get a lot of leverage off of that name more than anything.
Forge of Artakha. Okay, so this is a good time to ask for the meaning of that, or we have to go to a character first?
Essentially, for people who grew up actually reading the Bionicle stories. So Bionicle, for those who didn't grow up with it, was one of the big Lego themes from about 2001 to 2010, at a brief reboot in 2015 that lasted only about a year and a half. But aside from it just being like a toy product, what a lot of people might not know is that there were books and comic books that came out all throughout that entire run from 2001 to 2010. And there would be upwards to sometimes 8 to 12 books published year to year. So there was a pretty wide volume of stories. And I was in elementary, middle school primarily during that time period, but like this was like a really core thing that I was reading in my free time outside of like Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings and other miscellaneous things. This was like a core literary category. So like I spent a lot of my childhood reading these stories. So pretty much everything, almost everything in this account is in reference to these stories. Very few of the characters are actually like original. They're just my riffs off of established characters. And then where the name comes from is that within this very expansive kind of story and lore, there's one particular character called Artakha who is revealed kind of in the back half of the series. Just to kind of keep it brief, he's almost kind of like a Gandalf character. He's very ancient. He's almost all-knowing. He's almost omniscient. Most people regard him as a myth or a legend. Most people aren't aware that he exists, but he is kind of like this benevolent puppet master in the background that is trying to orchestrate events towards a positive outcome. And he's kind of, I would describe him as almost like the archetype of the god of smithing. He's like this ultimate creator type of character that can make anything if he's provided the raw resources. So the books, many of the books, when I grew up reading them, are from the perspective of a character. It's rather than like an omniscient third person, it's like from the perspective of characters. So this account is very much an homage, not only to the story as a whole, but just that type of writing where the perspective is from a character within the world itself. And because none of the books were from this character's perspective, he was always a mystery, but he has so much knowledge about the world. I thought it'd be cool to have the whole account be from his perspective. So not only do you have the lore aspect of, okay, this character actually has access to a lot of information, so it makes sense within world that he would know all that. Because he's kind of this god of smithing character, that also ties into the meta aspect of the builds themselves, where there's almost this plausible kind of connection of, okay, maybe some of these builds or some of these characters might have been actually created by the character. So there's kind of different layers of narrative happening there. And then the one final part of that is that this whole account started early during the pandemic because at the time there was a contest on, I think, the TTV forums, which is a Lego forum, for the fans, the community, to create their own rendition of Artakha. There was no set for this character. He only appeared in the books. There was no canon visual representation that was approved by Lego. So at the time, there was this big contest amongst the community to create their own version of the character. So this account was created in tandem with me submitting my submission for that contest. And even though I didn't win, the winner deserved it. They did a crazy build, very impressive. This ended up snowballing into this whole side hobby that kind of took on a life of its own.
Yeah, I'm very glad that you decided to continue building those ideas. That it all started with this challenge or the submission that you did. But I'm looking at the pieces and hearing about the lore. For sure, it looks very interesting to me. You don't see so often that the people that like to build characters or build pieces, they maybe are not thinking on the story behind the creation that you did. That is one of the questions I have. If we are talking about building the pieces, do you have the story before building or after building?
Initially, when I was first doing this in like early 2020, I was just kind of building things that were cool at the time. I had a lot of time on my hands during the COVID lockdowns. This all happened just because almost exactly a month or two prior to the pandemic lockdowns, I moved back in kind of my home area, and my parents, who had had all my Legos from childhood in their closets up until that point, they gave them all back to me. They're like, here, you take care of it now. So they were all moved from one closet to another, and then the COVID lockdowns happened.
Mm-hmm.
Phone and board, and I have all my childhood Legos. I'm like, okay, I'm just going to dump these all on the floor and just see what comes of that. So initially, I was just making things that just seemed cool at the time, or I had already built from like when I was in middle school. I was just taking new photos as an adult with them. And then as this has kind of snowballed into this whole new thing, now I will plan like months of content ahead of time, where I'll just have like a list of things that would be narratively cool to have in sequence. And now I'll try to build things specifically for a narrative. Whereas before I would either build a lot of things or take a photo of a lot of things, and then I would stitch the narrative together from what I had available in photo shoots. So initially it was very much, I was
Nice.
creating the story based on just what I had in the crayon box. Whereas now I'm very deliberate about what I'm building so that it is working towards a more cohesive story.
I'm excited to look at that paper as well, because I'm putting myself in your shoes. You start a project and then reaching that part of the line that you are starting to have like this responsibility and this compromise to have your schedule and to keep the track, because sometimes it will be hard to keep the track of a project that you built some time ago. You being able to find a way to organize yourself and keep the track, to keep building and keep getting this story more deeper and richer is nice to know. I want to share with people here some pieces so they can get to know the story behind them. Okay, so this one are inspired by Saint Seiya in some way.
Yeah, very kind of Thanos looking.
Okay.
The general vibe of, or the general idea behind this one and the ones that are kind of grouped with it, with the different colors. So these are all one character. In the story, at one point, interdimensional travel is introduced, and it's kind of like a what if kind of spinoff, kind of like what Marvel's doing now with the What If series. The BIONICLE story kind of did something similar with that. So taking that same idea, because this character is light based, they can alter their color palette based on the way that light reflects off of them. I thought it'd be cool that in different dimensions, the same character takes on a different hue depending on how light interacts with him. So these are all different variations of the same character across different dimensions.
Okay.
So while the original character is from the actual story, all of these different color versions are all just my own variation. None of these are actually characters from the story itself. And early on in the pandemic, I had some expendable income. I discovered a website called Shapeways, which is a 3D printing website. So a lot of these kind of custom masks and different colored masks come from different artists on Shapeways. And I also wanted a lot of these to be showcases for what people are doing elsewhere in the community. I'm really impressed with what people do, either in the 3D printing or in the molding space. So a lot of times I'll buy masks in bulk without much of a plan, and then I'll try to build something around that mask that someone else made to promote that person's account and promote their art. So those multicolored masks that are all the same mask with different colors was one of those attempts to showcase other people's art.
I'm excited about this episode because I'm starting to see that we have short time for the amount of things that we can get into regarding your art. So I already tell you this from the start. You are more than welcome and to be able to come here anytime for more episodes, and maybe we can plan more episodes about what you are doing, because I would love to go deeper on each of the things you do. We talk about Daniel. You have been seeing the builds that he has been doing, but he also is a writer. You told me about The Hobbit. Is the beginning point or more like a turning point for your career?
That was probably the first time I did anything that was particularly public with my art. I'm actually a very private person. My parents were very supportive of me pursuing a career in art, and I actually found it annoying at the time. Now in hindsight, I'm very grateful, but at the time I was like, no, this is me stuff. This is for me. This isn't for other people. I remember, I'll keep the Hobbit anecdote brief, but essentially The Hobbit is my favorite book of my childhood. Like that was the first book I remember my dad reading to me. I've read it countless times. I've taught it. I'm a high school teacher. I've actually taught it as a book in schools. And I remember watching the first of the 3 Hobbit films and immediately feeling both that there was something disappointing in the way that it was executed, and also seeing that there was a generally good movie buried in that movie. Like there was a lot of fat that could be trimmed out, but there was the core of the story was in there. It just had a lot of fat to trim. So I pretty much made a plan from that point that once all 3 movies were available on DVD, which happened around 2015, that I would make a plan to edit them all together. I had some experience with video editing prior to that, and had interest in being a filmmaker for a long time. So I put together my first draft of that fan edit around mid 2015. I think I was the 4th person to publish a fan edit of The Hobbit online. Now there's like dozens of them, and a lot of them are fantastic. They all kind of have their own different take. And I ended up uploading, I think, 3 different iterations of that cut. It's still available online. The quality isn't exactly where I want it to be, video quality. I had some technical difficulties with some software stuff that ended up being very time consuming to figure out, and I ended up having to put it down. But getting the positive feedback and the positive comments from people who did take the time to watch it, and it's a big time investment. It's like a 4-hour fan edit of like 9 hours of footage originally. Getting all the positive responses on Reddit or just on my WordPress in general, and seeing other people talk about it just freely on their own was definitely inspiring and motivating to continue doing art in the public. This Lego account definitely was not intended to be as big as it is now. It was very much just like a pandemic way to kill time. But I'm hoping that it will be a springboard to future creative projects that I'm working on that are entirely original, that hopefully will be able to kind of springboard off of this. And this is almost like a proof of concept now of ability more than anything. So that hopefully if people like my writing style here, or if they were a fan of the film that I put together, that maybe they would be interested in checking out some of my other art that would be more original. down the road.
Yeah, now that you're talking about your writing style, that is something that catch my eye when I discovered your account. In this case, we're talking about Forge of Artakha. When you click on any of the posts, you can see that every post comes with a nice caption, and in that caption is the story behind what is happening related to that image. Sometimes it's the story of the characters, and sometimes it's like a description of the situation happening, right?
Yeah.
Checking the latest post that you have here, in this case, Turaga. But to even a Turaga can be twisted and turned by shadow. So we are already into something. Something is happening. Something is happening, and I'm just getting here and noticing this by first time. So this is La Turaga.
It'd be like if like a mage or a warrior, once they like give up their power to like the next generation to empower like the next generation of heroes, they shrink in size. They shrink in size. They have reduced power, but they're almost treated as like the village elders. Like the Turaga is like a title of like, they're like the sage now. They're the wise kind of mentor of their community. So the idea is that the general trajectory of like kind of the Bionicle life span, for lack of a better word, is like there's the Matoran. They're kind of like the villagers. They're like the common people. They come from all these vast, diverse backgrounds. And then a select few of them become Toa. They're like the heroic knights of the Bionicle universe. They also have very diverse powers and abilities and backgrounds. And then of those that complete in Bionicle, they call it their destiny, whatever they're fated to do. If they survive that ordeal, they can then choose to essentially give their power to a new generation of Matoran. They become Toa, and then they in turn become Turaga and just become mentors. So these kind of shorter characters that are more shorter in size are supposed to be different variations of the Turaga concept, and are usually characters that we didn't actually see be Turaga in the actual canon story. So this is kind of part of that what if idea of what would it be if these classic characters from the original stories did become Turaga. What would they maybe look like? What kind of stories might be told around that?
The universe is connected canonically to the Bionicle one. Is the same universe, lines that went deeper from what we discovered with the launch of Bionicle.
Yes, the general idea behind this account is that I want it to read as closely as possible to having read one of the novels growing up. So if you read any of the books, I want the prose to almost feel about the same as the prose from those books. And I'm really trying to tap into people's nostalgia and their memory of what the actual story was, so that they don't have to learn a lot of new characters. They're connecting with characters that they already have a relationship with, either as a child, or maybe they're an adult now getting into it, and maybe they're reading about it through other sources like a wiki article or something. But the idea is that this story is just either a continuation or a deeper dive of the actual canon story that Lego themselves wrote. I try as much as I can not to deviate from that, and if I do, I make it very clear that this is just a personal, for fun deviation. But I try to make like 80% or more of the content be strictly just reinterpretations of things that Lego already told stories about.
That is nice. That risk of having an existing universe and trying to create based on an existing line without this feeling of I'm going to mess up the line, or stories that has a timeline and you can keep track. And I enjoy Lord of the Rings, Star Wars. In the case of video games, I like Zelda and Metroid, and it's because of the timeline aspect too, that you can get inside the game, inside the story, inside the universe, and try to live and imagine yourself living in that time.
Yeah, they're all the things you just described are very immersive stories, where it's very to imagine yourself not only there in the universe, but your context within the universe. Like there's a time and there's a place that affects how people interact, and it's very organic, intuitive. This is like a weird thing to try to describe to people who didn't grow up with it, but I would sincerely, without exaggeration, really put the level of detail that went into the Bionicle story primarily written by Greg Farshti, who is an author, and Christian Faber, who is the creator of the Bionicle line and several other Lego series. The level of detail and like the thematic richness of what they were telling through these toys, oddly enough, and these comic books and these novels, I would put up there with some of the best sci-fi and some of the best fantasy I've ever read. Like, I still think about these stories. I don't think, not just because it was a formative time, but because the stories themselves were genuinely interesting and genuinely engaging, and were really like doing some pretty complex narrative things. So I think part of what makes this project, this Instagram project, so fun for me and so kind of never ending as far as content, is that the story is so rich. There's so many different things that you can pull from. It's almost as vast as Star Wars, which is limitless. The Bionicle canon is almost on that level of, you could really go in any direction and you would still be on very firm ground of, okay, I know where and when this takes place. I have a general sense of who or what would be happening. And the things that are happening and who they're happening to are always interesting, and they're always novel. Yeah, it's just like a very open, immersive sandbox. And I think that's part of the allure of the Bionicle series, is that it really is accessible to anyone with either a little or a lot of information. It's just like a fun space to explore fantasy and sci-fi tropes.
For sure. Yeah, I agree with you. And I'm thinking in this story being available in other platforms or other ways besides this Instagram account. Is this because I found other account regarding Forge of Artakha, Travels of Takua.
Yes, that's my other secret account. I haven't updated it in a while. He'll return at some point. He's actually right here. I have Takua right here.
Nice.
My homie.
Yeah.
So that was actually the initial account.
So we are still with the Turaga, right?
Yes. Yeah, they all appear. So this account is much more, it was, I haven't updated in a while, but when the Bionicle series first launched in 2001, it initially started as an online flash game, like a point and click flash game, where, again, very immersive. There was original, very ambient music. It was very environmental storytelling. There was no voice acting at all. So everything was either communicated visually or through some text box. And I just have this really vivid memory of my mother is an elementary school teacher. And at the time, I would go to work with her early and I would stay late after other kids had left. So I would spend my mornings on the computer.
Classic.
And I would end my day on the computers, and I would just spend hours and hours in this game, just completely immersed in the storytelling of this game. It's held up very well. You can download it for free. It's called the Matt and Nui online game. There's free versions online that you can download. It's really a remarkable piece of art, and it's a remarkable piece of like promotional art. The fact that like they launched this whole brand new thing with like a very mysterious flash game that was not easy to play. It was very ambient. It was very atmospheric. Really, really cool storytelling. All that to say, the Travels of Takua account is my attempt to recreate as best as I can, beat for beat, the story of that game specifically. So just that one little slice of the story is the Travels of Takua. And at the time, I was living in this really beautiful area in the Pacific Northwest of the United States. I was a 10-minute walk from the beach. There was a forest right behind me. It was the beginning of the pandemic, so people were either inside or they were out in nature. You didn't bump into a lot of people at the time. So I was able to very easily just take Takua out to some really cool scenic places and just have that be the backdrop and create this illusion of this very inorganic kind of robotic character in these very organic, mysterious
I like that, yeah.
places. And that was kind of the initial allure of the series, is like, okay, these machines wake up on this tropical island. There's no people, there's no organic creatures, but there's clearly mechanical life existing in a very organic environment. And that dichotomy was immediately interesting, just visually. And then also leads to all these narrative questions of like, okay, well, why is that? And there are reasons why. So this series was kind of my attempt to both enjoy the outdoors during the pandemic and also to kind of recreate a little bit of that magic I remember experiencing as a kid.
I like the way you're mixing this bionic life with other bio-life or bio-life that we can see water, we can see grass, we can see land too. And it's like your take on photography.
Yes. Yeah. I was really into photography as a kid. So this was also me kind of getting back into that. And I mean, I live in just a really beautiful area of Washington State. And I wanted to both enjoy that just in person and also kind of showcase like the beauty of where I was living to the world outside. Like I noticed a lot of people would comment that they'd never seen trees like the evergreens in the Pacific Northwest. And I always thought that was like interesting that for some people who were following the account, it was the geography that they really found most interesting. And for some people it was the story, and for some people it was the build. So I think on that account and the Forge account, people come for different things. And I find that both amusing and also very inspiring that like anytime we make art, people can like it for very different reasons, even different reasons than we might have intended.
Or the storyline, maybe the writing aspect.
Yeah. And then one thing that really pushed me to continue doing this, other than like doing it for like a week or two before I just moved on to something else, the creator of the BIONICLE series, his name is Christian Faber. He's very active online still. He's still making new IPs. And I think within like the second or third post I made on both of the accounts, he followed me out of the blue on Instagram.
Nice.
And
makes sense.
I've been chasing that high ever since. It'd be like George Lucas following your account, like your Star Wars. Like,
how epic is that? Yeah.
He's super involved. He's really nice. I've spoken with him a few times. He's just a really sweet guy. But just the fact that like the person who I credit personally as like inspiring a lot of creative ideas for myself is not only still involved, but also like actively engaging with my fan art now, just that I do for fun, is like super trippy to think about. It definitely helps motivate me to keep going. That if the guy who made the original thing likes what I'm doing, then like that's a good feeling. So
that's a good feeling. Yeah, for sure. For sure it is. Of course. Yeah, and I can see a lot of potential on this account as well as Forge of Artakha. Both accounts has a very nice potential, and we are talking about two different type of experience that you can have. Both accounts has a very rich storyline and a writing aspect of it on the captions of the post. Visually speaking, two type of experiences too. I can notice that. I like the way you implement photography and you use landscapes and like this type of elements and try to mix that with the already existing storyline. It's not about only building the piece or only having a nice story written. It's about everything at the same time happening as one experience. Sometimes people get to account for different interests, but is everything mixed in only one experience that the person will have meeting your content. And it's very subjective if we see it that way, but it's very important to try to have a very good understanding, a solid understanding of the experience that you're delivering to your audience. And I admire you for that. Thank you again for being here. I wish you all the best for these accounts and for your career specifically.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. This has been a lot of fun. I'm really impressed with what you're putting together and connecting these different artistic groups that seem so independent at a glance. But I really like that you're bridging kind of the behind the scenes of all these different artistic endeavors and kind of exploring the ways that artists work and think, even subconsciously. I think that's a really cool project, and I'm excited to see what you do with this in the future.